to the, January 27th meeting of the Blackstone Millville Regional School District with the Town of Millville Board of Selectmen, Town of Millville Finance Committee, Town of Blackstone Board of Selectmen, and Town of Blackstone Finance Committee members. I'd officially like to call our meeting to order of the school committee. Are there any other boards? Blackstone already called their Board of Selectmen meeting. Does anybody else need to open theirs?
I can open the finance committee for Millville because
Thanks,
we have.
All right, official. Do you need anybody to second?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Do I? I don't think so.
I do know that there are a lot of faces here today, those who are showing their faces. So I thought maybe we could do some introductions, but instead of having everybody just kind of throw out some names, I'll just say your first name as I see them on my screen. And if you're going to introduce yourself and let us know who you're representing, that would be great. I am Jane Reggio. I am on the school committee and a member from the town of Millville. Mary?
Blackstone Board of Selectmen.
Bob?
Blackstone Board of Selectmen.
Jennifer?
Millville Board of Selectmen. I assume you mean Jennifer Gill because I'm a camera on. There are two Jennifers on the Millville Board of Selectmen.
Jason?
Jason DeFalco, Superintendent.
Aaron?
Erin Vanaco, Millville School Committee.
Sarah?
Sarah Larkin, Millville?
Sorry.
Or was it Sarah? Sorry.
Sarah? Sorry.
Sarah Williams, Blackstone School Committee.
Greg?
Hi, Greg Bialykonis, Acting Town Administrator, Blackstone.
Oh, welcome. I don't think we've met yet.
Not yet.
Yet's the key. Carrie, you're next.
Carrie Goddett, Blackstone School Committee.
Tammy?
Tammy Lemieux, Blackstone School Committee.
Jill?
Jill Pillagallerani, I'm the Director of Learner Support Services for the district.
Matthew?
Matt Aaronworth, Assistant Superintendent.
Sorry. Kathy?
Kathy Nelson, Blackstone Finance
Welcome.
Committee. I think I'm the only one here.
No, Joe's right next to you.
Joe Gatchell, Blackstone Finance Committee.
And Aubrey?
Aubrey Bono, Millville Finance Committee.
And Peter?
Peter Caruso, Millville Town Administrator.
Hi, Peter. Karen?
Karen Vernon, Millville School Committee.
Brian?
Brian Scanlon, Blackstone Finance Committee.
Oh, and the other Brian P.
Brian Pacheco, Millville Finance Committee.
Tara? Oh, you kind of went, but you can go again.
Tara Larkin, Millville School Committee.
Hi, Ken.
Ken Tubman, Millville Finance Committee.
And Ross.
Hi, Ross, Blackstone Finance Committee.
And Andrew.
Andrew Allward, Millville Board of Selectmen.
And Jack. Well, Jack is muted, but I believe it's probably Jack Keefe. And then Jen.
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect.
And the other Jen?
Jennifer Dean Wing, Millville Board of Selectmen. And I just want to make a point that the Millville Board of Selectmen, it has 3 members, so we will be opening our meeting also.
Okay. Do you need to do it formally or is that good enough?
Our vice chair may want to do that.
Oh, okay.
Sure. So I will open the Board of Selectmen meeting for Millville at 7:06 p.m.
Thank you very much. Anybody else need to do that? Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see faces. It seems like it's been a while. Hope everybody's doing well and staying safe. We have a brief agenda, but we have a lot of things to cover. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. DeFalco, who will talk about the FY22 preliminary pass at the school budget. Let you know where we are.
Thank you so much, Ms. Reggio. So nice to see everybody tonight. I know we can't be in person, but it's nice to see friendly faces and familiar faces. It's been a long time since we've all had a chance to congregate, at least virtually. So, and a big welcome to Greg. Nice to put a face with the voice. So it was very nice to meet you. So looking forward to a great partnership with everybody as we continue to move forward through the budget process. And I will say that the budget cycle for FY22 continues to unfold as we speak, as recent as 3 o'clock this afternoon, when Matt and I were updating numbers as the governor put them out and we got the updated cherry sheets. So I will tell you that the numbers are hot off the press, as updated as recent as 3 o'clock today. So with all of that, I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second here and make sure.
And Matt, while Jason's sharing, can you put the document in the chat so people can have access to it?
The PDF version?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I have, first let me just double check. Can folks see the PowerPoint okay?
Yes.
Yep, okay, perfect. So we are happy to be at this stage in our budget process this evening. And as we always do, just want to quickly anchor the conversation in our district improvement strategy. One of the things I think that has helped the system be so successful, or as successful as we've been through this pandemic, we haven't been without our challenges and missteps, of course, but we have stayed very true to our district improvement strategy. We have not paused the work and just kind of done COVID, so to speak. We have actually leaned into our strategy now more than ever and have been really asking ourselves, how do we fulfill our purpose while navigating the pandemic and trying our hardest to keep kids in school and as much face-to-face learning as possible. So you will hear tonight a little bit about our work with our district improvement strategy that is going strong on year 3. And we're very pleased to continue to lean into that work and use that strategy to improve the experience and the outcomes for our students. So let's just talk quickly about who our students are. I think this is really important to highlight. This is our updated demographic data. And I won't read all of these demographics to you, but it gives you a quick snapshot of our students. I do want to share, if you look down at the 2 bullet points from the bottom, our high needs numbers and our % of free and reduced lunch students. This is important to note because high needs is our students that either identify as students with special needs and or English language learners and also qualify for free and reduced lunch. So it's a combination thereof. And so I want to highlight that too. I also want to just share again, I know we had this conversation for those of you who recall last year at this time, when you look back at 2010, our students who qualify for free and reduced lunch were about 10%. And steadily over the past decade, we have grown to nearly 40% as a school district. And I think that's important to note because we know that our students are coming to our schools each day with different needs. And I'm a very firm believer in getting ahead of it and trying to plan to ensure that we have all the systems, structures, and services in place to meet the needs of every student. So I do want to highlight that because we are going to talk a bit about those needs this evening and frankly, how they have been impacted by our current pandemic. And the last bullet, I think, is something for us to really celebrate. And so you might be aware the Department of Education collected what they called structured learning time survey data from every school system across the Commonwealth. Now we know there's about 350 schools. However, you'll notice that that last bullet looks at 271. That is because when the data was collected, The other 70 schools were in a full remote status. They were not doing any in-person learning at all. And I will say to you that when the data came out, it's a really weird data point, and it's not anything we ever thought we would talk about or celebrate, frankly, until this happened. But right here in BMR, there are 11 school districts with more live learning than us out of the 271. And of those 11, only 6 have 3 hours more. And that's over a 2-week span. So that's not a significant number. And so we are very close to the very top in terms of school systems that are offering live learning, face-to-face instruction through this pandemic. Again, it's a weird kind of data point, and it's not something that we ever thought we'd be talking about. But when we look at the program that we're putting in front of our students this year, I will say very, very kind of candidly that it hasn't been without its challenges, and it remains to be a challenge, but we are doing as much in-person learning as possible. And there are only 5 or 6 districts that are far exceeding what we're doing. And so a big shout out to our teachers, to our principals, to our school committee, to our families who have been very much behind that. I will also say here, it's not on the slide, but between March 13th and December 16th, that was the last time we did a data check, we have served our community at no charge over 264,000 meals. And I think that is something to be celebrated in terms of what our very small food service team has been able to do, and our team of volunteers. You may or may not be aware that we have fed 7 days a week through all of our vacations, including summer, holidays. Just the New Year's week alone, we did over 400 meals. And we continue. We have done dairy boxes and produce boxes. We're doing produce and vegetable bags again in a week or so. And I say that also because it's important to note that, the struggle's real. And I am just really pleased that we have been able to serve our community in this capacity, in addition to putting as much in-person learning in front of our students as we can, so much so that there's only a half dozen systems in the state that have been able to do it better or more. So I do want to highlight those, a couple of data points. So I want to talk also a little bit, and Matt's going to kind of tag team this with me, because I think it's important to note as we talk about resources, we've got to highlight the grants that we are aggressively going after. I'm excited, actually, the community will see a YouTube video that our very own Jesse Defoe put together for us, who's actually facilitating all this behind the scenes for us tonight. So thank you so much, Jesse. And really took a deep dive into one of the grants. It was a $100,000 grant that we were awarded for our middle school to look at career exploration and to really help our students dive deeply into artificial intelligence, robotics, engineering, biomedicine, and some other pathways within the arts. But with that, I just want to take a moment, and I'm going to highlight a couple of grants that we have written and have been awarded, and to give our town leadership a little bit of a sense of where we're going with this work. BMR, we're small, but we're strong, and we're doing a lot of very creative things. We put this year, for the first time, a brand new biomedical pathway in our high school. That was all grant funded. We aggressively went after a $75,000 grant, and it was awarded. So we have, for the first time, a biomedical program that we are very excited. We're in year 1 of the program, and the students have been very, very interested, engaged, and just loving the courses. We recently applied for a engineering and manufacturing pathway for the high school. We submitted the grant on January 15th, and we are very excited and eager to hear if we will be awarded that. We have a new welding and cybersecurity courses that we're actually offering through the Blackstone Valley Superintendent Consortium. Myself and all the Blackstone Valley superintendents, there's about 13 of us, meet all the time, and we share resources, and we talk about, how can we get access to each other's programs and opportunities for students, because as you know, in the Valley, there's a lot of small systems, and it's hard to take a lot of things to scale because the resources are tight. So a few years ago, we started doing a lot of collaborative work and talking a bit about how do we share resources. So next week, we're actually offering, we have 3 students, I believe, from our high school that are taking a virtual welding course, which is actually pretty awesome. And we have 4 students who are taking a cybersecurity course. These are all online. Last year, we had 6 students that participated in manufacturing 1 and 2. We've never had that before, but through this collaborative work, we're really excited to be able to offer those opportunities to our students. We also are in the midst of co-authoring, myself, the superintendent from Hopedale, and Bellingham, Sutton, and Uxbridge are co-authoring up to a $300,000 grant to be able to actually formalize and expand the Blackstone Valley career pathways for students. Again, teaming up and trying to really kind of use each other's strengths and lean into the strengths of the other systems around us to give students what we hope will end up being a portfolio of options and opportunities for kids. And the last piece I'm going to just touch on, which I briefly mentioned already, and then I'm going to kick it over to Matt, is a little bit about our career exploration opportunities at our middle school. Frankly, we think the high school is too late. We don't want to wait to start. So we wrote a grant for $100,000 and we were awarded that. It's a 3-year grant, about $33,000 a year for programs, for equipment for our program, for professional development and training, guest speakers for students. And it has been incredible to watch. You know, a classroom where we had a STEM opportunity for students that existed of like 4 or 5 robots is completely taken off. With coding, artificial intelligence, robotics, makerspace, 3D printers, one-to-one technology. It's really awesome. It has really transformed the landscape of this work at the middle school. But more importantly, will help prepare the students for when they enter into BMR high school to think about which pathways they may be interested in taking as they stay on that career preparedness track as well, or college preparedness track as well, but to expand offerings and career development. And I just want to bring everybody back to that first slide where we talked about our district strategy, because our district purpose is to ensure that we are preparing happy, healthy, proficient students ready for college, career, and community. Sounds cliche, I get it, but that is the purpose of this district. And we are anchoring everything back to that. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other grant opportunities?
Absolutely, thank you. So I know they seem like they're a little less money right below, but every penny counts when we're looking at making sure that we have what we need for the district. So a couple of the smaller grants, though significant enough, we did apply for the Safer Schools and Communities grant. That helped us equip all of the buildings with the infrastructure for our video cameras, which I'm happy to say that at this point, we have essentially 360-degree external coverage of all of the buildings and a really sufficient amount of internal cameras that we are continuing to grow. We wrote a couple of Maya risk management grants to procure safety equipment. Most recently, we have been awarded $6,000, and we're getting slip-resistant matting to put into all of the different buildings. We're assessing the highest priority needs. Not on this list are a few of the grants that Maureen Gonzalez and I wrote with respect to the food service program. We've brought in over $20,000 worth of funding for that program to help us sustain the practice of feeding the community through this entire pandemic, and also to better equip the kitchen to move forward with these efforts. And then back to some more significant grants. We did receive the ESSER grant from the state. That original summer grant was $142,000. We received the Coronavirus Relief Fund grant that we also needed to apply for, which gave us $383,000. And then more of a competitive grant, though still through the state, was the Remote Learning Technology Essentials grant. And that grant actually enabled us to make sure that we finalized our one-to-one program this year, which was super imperative given the nature of our remote and hybrid learning practices. And that also was something that afforded us the opportunity to provide families in need with hotspots to receive internet service so that they could make sure that they're participating in the learning that's happening every day at BMR.
So, Matt, that's a perfect segue. Let's talk a little bit about the learning that's taking place. I think this is critically important. So, as you know, we have no MCAS data to share. We develop our budget around our district strategy and our student outcomes, and we use every dollar we have to think about, and we look at every dollar we have, frankly, to think about, are we using it correctly to get the needs that we are looking for? Our team subscribes very much to the notion that the system you build will give you the results you get. So if you don't like the results, fix the system. And so we do that with our budget as well, as you know, not just once a year, but we're constantly looking at it. Well, this year, not having end of year data, frankly, at all, was really, really difficult for us. We are incredibly data driven. And so what we wanted to share this evening is really quite sobering. And I'll explain, what we're looking at here in a moment. But this really shows the impact that the pandemic and the absence of that day-to-day, in-person, full instructional day learning has had on our students. As much as we're trying, as hard as we're trying to get students in as many days a week as we can in front of teachers for as long as we can, because we know that's the best type of instruction there is. You can see clearly the impact. So what we did was we're sharing with you this evening what we look at as kind of year-over-year data. And so we have our own internal assessment system. We use the STAR assessment system, and we measure student growth and achievement on English and math throughout the school year. We don't wait for MCAS and use that data once. And I would also mention that in between our kind of 3 times a year where we check in with a common assessment for common measures, we of course have ongoing projects, papers, essays, unit tests, quizzes, those kinds of things that students are always doing for us to monitor as well. But this is helpful because it's apples to apples in terms of data points. Now, what's important to note is when you look at the ELA meeting and exceeding percentages for fall of 2020 compared to fall of 2019, those are different students, right? Those are apples to oranges. Those are different kids. We tend to look at things normally as cohorts to look to see the growth that kids are making over time, but we intentionally didn't look at that here. And that's because we want to show year over year what is going on in terms of how has the pandemic impacted academic achievement as our students finished last year in a full remote model and came back in a either in-person hybrid or some full remote, frankly, for families who are still not comfortable sending their children in. What you'll notice as you look at English language arts, the results are not as significant in terms of the impact of lower achievement. You'll notice in second grade that our students this fall scored 3% lower in terms of meeting grade level expectations than last fall students. Third grade, which to me is a very significant grade because we talk about that 8 is too late. Kids need to be at grade level by third grade. You can see that the kids came in almost 10% lower than the year before. This is showing the impact of that absence of day in, day out, face-to-face instruction all spring. Again, grade 3, you can see a reduction of 3%. I want to draw your attention to grade 6. That is a significant decrease. Our 6th graders are starting out 12% of them below grade level standards than where our counterparts in 6th grade did last year. What's interesting is the 7th grade showed a little bit of an uptick, about 5%. And so that's kind of an outlier, if you will. But you'll notice that by and large, our students are starting the year already behind from where their counterparts started the year before. Now, what is also important to note, if you look at the column to the right, you'll see the math scores are far more dire than the ELA scores. But it kind of makes sense from the perspective. Students will go home and pick up a book, a newspaper, a magazine, a graphic novel, comics, right? It's easier to get your arms around stuff to read. With math, I think a lot of you would probably agree. It's one of those things that if you're not really using it, you're kind of losing it. And you need refresh and reminders and a lot of practice. You can see the math needs are far more significant in terms of where our students are this fall compared to where they were last fall. And I want to say to the community, so that you're not, wondering, well, what are you doing about this? Let me be very clear. We're not waiting till next year to fix this. We have very tight data cycles where we're monitoring the achievement between our beginning, middle, and end of year testing that we'll be doing, unit tests, projects, essays, and teachers are meeting in what we call PLCs, or professional learning communities, to look at student work and to talk about what they can be doing and what we can be doing to help and try to mitigate these gaps now. And for those of you who are educators on the conversation this evening, I know that this probably resonates with you quite a bit. And for those of you who are parents, myself included, have seen, perhaps their own children take a step back in some ways academically. I know I have with my boys. It is of great concern, and we are certainly not waiting to address it. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about the budget process to date?
Absolutely. So to start, this year, it was an imperative that we asked the principals and the cost center leaders to focus on ways to remediate the academic and social emotional gaps that we were going to be seeing coming into next year. I mean, it is entirely inevitable that we're going to be seeing these gaps. Dr. DeFalco already referenced, we're seeing them at the beginning of the year data this year. And now we've been through even more of this remote and hybrid learning process. So we're trying to gear up to fix that issue. We did, however, make sure that all of the principals were maintaining a focus on their school's instructional work that was taking place with the ILTs and the school-based leadership, so that we weren't losing momentum with the actual work that we've started with and moving the teaching and learning forward for all of the students. So once we spoke to the principals, they went back to their buildings, reached out to their staff and their department connections and asked for an assessment. They were put together. Cost center managers, being whether it be music department, athletics department, our building principals, special education, they put together their budgets and made sure that there were pieces to support their school improvement plans. It connected directly to our district blueprint for improvement. And again, there was a focus on addressing the needs that we were going to see based on the current pandemic. The cost center managers then met with Jason and I. We met with each one of them. I will say we did a preliminary maybe recommendation of crossing some things off of those budgets. However, it was their needs assessment, so we really didn't take too much out unless it really didn't serve the purpose of fitting into their instructional focus, but everyone was very good about it. After that, we presented our budget workshops and gave the school committee the opportunity to see what those priorities are and where we were thinking we were going to go. And just last night, we started taking pen to paper once again. The school committee went in and started discussing what it was that they felt were priorities and things that they could see. If we had to eliminate certain pieces, then these are the ones that would be the lowest priority. And as you can see, and you will see further in the presentation, there were already positions removed last night, 0.5 custodian position, a PE wellness position, a district social worker position, and a 0.5 early childhood coordinator position that we were looking to get, but didn't make the list of priorities for doing what we need to do, bouncing back from this COVID pandemic. So some of the things that you will see in the FY22 needs-based budget that we are presenting, there's materials and resources. We are focused on making sure we budget for math curriculum materials, potentially only 1 year because we're still going to be in the process of evaluating the math curriculum. We don't want to start purchasing materials that we may change course from pretty quickly. We still need to support our ELA program implementation, which is new. And we've been working on, just making small tweaks to the curriculum and making sure that we have the proper supporting materials in place. We also, as Dr. DeFalco mentioned, we want to make sure we're focused on our career readiness program and continue growing that. Our social emotional learning resources that we need to make sure that students are getting what they need as they return to the district from these COVID-related issues, but also just in general. We had a focus on SEL prior to COVID hitting, and that really has just made it all that much more important for us to maintain that focus. Again, people know that so we started some diversity and social equity programs this past year, and we want to maintain a focus on that because it's a priority to the district, as it should be, and as it is to the entire nation, particularly now. We want to make sure that we're making our students and our community aware of what's going on and what the resources are that we can use to try to improve things in this country and the world, hopefully. We just had our presentation from DRA about our capital planning project. So there are going to be some references to some facility and grounds work. To be clear, there are no capital asks in this budget, but there was some funds set aside, smaller amounts, just to do some of the very preliminary repairs and make sure that we might be bringing some things up to code. But those still, the big pieces are going to be moving toward a capital planning committee or subcommittee, so to speak, for the school district. And last but certainly not least, we know that this has been a topic of conversation for both towns and for the district. We wanted to make sure that we were incorporating funding for our OPEB, our post-employment benefits, so that we can put ourselves in a place, or at least start to put ourselves in a place, where we would be generating the appropriate funding to secure the retirement and benefits for all of our retirees and people that have left the district.
So, Matt, and thanks for the overview on the materials piece. I think it's important to really think about this budget from two perspectives. It's the district improvement strategy and continuing to lean into that strategy while we're addressing the return and recovery work that needs to be done to help really, mitigate and close those gaps that have developed as a result of the instructional model that we have now because of the pandemic. So to do that, we've really looked at staffing from a very strategic place. So Matt referenced a few things that we removed from the budget, but we tried to be very creative in making sure that we still have some of those services in place. So Jill and I, Jill Piligalarani, our Director of Learner Support Services, and I are going to kind of walk through some of these positions with you to give you a deeper sense of what we are looking at from a strategic staffing standpoint. So you'll notice here that we have the title of this slide a little bit different. It says unfilled and reconfigured. That's because we actually had a associate principal position in our budget this year for the JFK AFM complex that we left unfilled because of the instructional model we had. Frankly, we all pitched in. Our assistant principals pulled double duty. Our middle school assistant principal also works at the JFK AFM complex, and our high school assistant principal helps out at Millville Elementary. And we all basically just cover for each other and assist. So because of the model we're in this year, we're able to do that. Also because as we were going through the regional agreement process, we weren't sure how that was going to turn out. And so what we did this year was we left that vacant, that position. We held on to those dollars so that we could then use them to help pay for some of the COVID-related positions that we knew we were going to need to fill to get our classrooms open, frankly. And so now that we have a new regional agreement in place and we're reorganizing Millville Elementary, which will become a pre-K to 2 school, and the JFK AFM complex, a grades 3 to 5 school, although there'll be a 1-year transition model in between before that happens in its entirety, we don't need the associate principal. As a matter of fact, we are going to instead be moving forward with a planning, teaching, and learning coach that specializes at the pre-K through 2 elementary level that can work side by side with teachers and helping those teachers, their youngest learners, develop lessons, implement those lessons, give them feedback, look at student outcomes, and figure out how do we meet the needs of those kids better. So currently we have a coach at the elementary level that does that work for both buildings, one at the secondary, grades 6 through 12, that does that work for both buildings, and a special education coach that is aligning our programs and instructional practices pre-K through 12 in the district. So what we are looking to do is reconfigure that position, not hire another administrator, but instead an instructional coach to help the teachers side by side in the classrooms with that work at a cost savings, frankly. And it's not new money, it's already in the budget. And so we're really excited about that. The second area that I think is incredibly important, and Matt mentioned earlier that we, eliminated the full-time social worker position from the budget, which I think we desperately need. However, what we are going to look to do instead is essentially create a stipended opportunity for one of our clinical staff, adjustment counselors and guidance counselors, to really help with those family wraparound services. It's interesting. School is not a 10-month operation anymore. I'm a firm believer in that. I don't think that, come July, we just let the kids go and we don't see them again until September. We have incredibly high needs families. You saw our data slide in the beginning of our discussion. 38% of our families are high needs, 38%. We are nearing half of our student population. We cannot afford to not be providing wraparound services for those students and families through the months of July and August and over our vacations, frankly. We have a tiered system in place that we've identified some indicators. We know who the families are, and we have got to put those scaffolds and supports in place for those kids during those vacation months. So while it's a far cry from a full-time social worker that we really need, we can still provide that wraparound support work for students and families at a much smaller cost. So it's one of those things where it's not exactly what we're looking for, but we could scale it back and try to target those really, what we would argue, those at-risk times, because frankly, it's the times when the kids aren't with us and we can't lay eyes on them. And so we've got a lot of work that we can do, I think, with a small amount during that, using this model. The second piece, and I'm actually going to have Jill talk a bit about this because a lot of this is within the special education realm. Jill, do you want to go through this with the group this evening?
Sure. So if you notice, one of the first requests we are looking to add a substantially separate K-1 teacher. In special education over the last few years, we've really worked hard at developing programs within the district, very specialized programs in our district to be able to meet the needs of the students in our district. So we don't have to send them out of district because we're not able to meet their needs. We've done that, and we have an elementary currently in place, an elementary alternative program. We have an elementary essentials program. We also have a very specialized pragmatic learning classroom for our students who are on the autism spectrum. We have a middle school essentials program. At the high school, we have 3 programs: a community connections program, which supports our students who are staying longer than 4 years, 18 to 22, as well as a high school essentials class and an alternative program at the high school. What we're requesting now is we are missing now that elementary essentials classroom. We have students who will be coming out of our substantially separate preschool classroom who do need something a little bit more specialized than just an inclusion program where they'd be supported in the regular education classroom or a small a pull-out program. This is really a well-developed program. So we are looking to make sure that we have that for our students and we're able to maintain our students in our district. So that's our first ask. We're also looking to bring on a teacher of the deaf. Right now, we do have contracted services for several of our programs, teacher of the deaf, our teacher of the visually impaired, our orientation mobility specialist. But we've actually found over the last couple of years, we have a pretty big influx of students who are coming to us with hearing impairments. And if we look at the best way to meet our students' needs right now are some of our staff that the programs we're consulting with are doing a lot of it virtually. And when it comes to our teacher of the deaf and the amount of students we have right now, we're looking to add to that program. Just to give you a sense financially, consulting wise, if we were to bring a teacher of the deaf on for just 4 hours a day, it would cost us close to $95,000 for just 4 hours a day. That doesn't include the transportation cost, the mileage that they're charging us. So it's a good decision to have our own for financial reasons, but also to have our own staff member who's there on a daily basis to work with our students. We also have in our budget this year a one-to-one nurse. We need to make sure that if we have any students who may have those medical needs, which we do, that we need to bring that person on to be able to meet those needs during the day. And this is very different than our school nurse. We also have in there, we're very excited, we're looking to expand our preschool program. Just to give you a sense, it's both for to be able to give more opportunity to our communities for our role model, our regular education students, but we've also had a very large early intervention referrals this year. Just to give you an idea, last year, our total early intervention enrollment and parents asking for evaluations for students prior to them turning age 3, so our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, for the entire year last year was 31. As of today, we've already had 28 referrals. So we're seeing that definitely the referrals are up. I think it's partially, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that with the school closure, a lot of our students who would normally get those interventions prior to the age of 3 haven't been getting them. So we're seeing more students coming in and referred, more students qualifying, and we're actually seeing students with higher needs. The other thing we did send out, just so you know, our application for preschool went out, and we actually also surveyed the parents to see if we had any families that were interested in full day. Right now we run half-day sessions for the majority of our students. We have morning sessions, we have afternoon sessions. So we're looking to add on another person who could take on the role of offering another session of preschool, possibly integrated or substantially separate depending on our need, as well as doing some of the coordination work, the outreach, the meetings, the timelines, all of that coordination and assessment. And again, you'll see on there that this is partially funded through our tuition for our role model students. With that increase in the teacher, we would also, all of our preschools, for requirements for regulations from the Department of Ed, there needs to be a certain number of role model students as well as special needs students, and those ratios to student teacher is a teacher with a paraprofessional or an ABA paraprofessional with those numbers. So bringing on another section of preschool would also require bringing on another, it says ABA technician, but it's a paraprofessional that would join that classroom. You'll also see in there, you know, with making sure that our buildings are maintained. We're looking for half-time custodian at Millville Elementary School. And then we're also looking for 2 STEM teachers. And the STEM teachers will be our specials for our kids. We are looking, now that we have an early childhood school and some of our upper elementary, we want to make sure that there's equal services. So we want to make sure that we have STEM in both buildings. And that's also going to allow us to take some of our specialists out of the classroom for specials. For example, our reading specialist have been providing more of the specials for the teachers. So it's a whole class type of, instruction. So what we're hoping is with the STEM teachers, being able to get them in the classroom, work with, have the students, our remedial reading specialists will actually be able to pull smaller groups of students out of the classroom that have been identified and really target those skills, which we really need to do because I know we've mentioned it before, these next couple of years are really going to be big recovery years for us and be able to provide our students with the interventions that they need to kind of bring them back up and to catch them up.
Gil, if I could tag in for 1 second.
Sure.
I know that the part-time custodial position may seem a bit out of place on this slide, but we had conversations last night that I'd like to fill everyone in on at the school committee level. There were custodial positions that were removed a couple of years ago, and they were never reinstated. And we currently are actually functioning shorthanded in our custodial staff. We're able to manage that right now, given some of the additional support during the day for disinfection and maintaining the building on the daily basis. And that's through some COVID funding. But as the kindergartners moved to the Millville, and as the first graders are moving to Millville, there has been a split position in the evenings that allows, it's a 0.5 at Millville and a 0.5 at the complex. And it really keeping up with the younger students and the number of kids over carpeting in particular at the MES, we really do feel it's necessary with the shift in student population to try to add this 0.5 position for MES.
Thanks, Matt, for the overview. And thanks, Jill, for the explanation. I think that was a good segue. The last piece around our staffing, and you'll notice here we've titled this Return and Recovery, because frankly, we don't think these should be forever positions. We are hoping that these are 2-year positions. And we're saying 2 years because we think that's what it's probably going to take in order for us to actually close the gaps that have been created through this, the gaps that we looked at earlier in our conversation this evening, particularly around reading and math, but more so math. And you'll notice that on, excuse me, on laid out in front of you, you have, the bulk of these positions being tailored to mathematics. 2 elementary math interventionists, one for MES, one for the complex, a high school math interventionist. The reason you do not see a middle school math interventionist here is because we have one already. And we are fairly confident that that will be, that one position will be enough to help close those gaps in mathematics. But we do need to, at the elementary level, we do need one at the high school. And then you'll notice that we are also looking for an ELA interventionist, English language arts interventionist at the high school. And we're looking to increase our reading specialists, a half reading specialist to the complex and half to the middle school to increase the literacy supports for our students. Again, I want to be clear, and you can see it at the bottom of the slide that we're looking to allocate some additional COVID grant funding toward these. We're not looking at these as forever positions. They shouldn't be, frankly. We should be able to leverage these for a year or two. We're hoping 2 at the most to be able to close those gaps. And so before I turn this over to Matt, and Matt's going to kind of take us through the numbers now, I want to thank everyone for their engagement in that. I know that there's a lot of kind of educational jargon and stuff all up front, but truly, when we say that we use our students to drive the needs in the budget development, we really mean that. We look at our student data, the performance, the programming that they should have access to. We look for every grant we could possibly go after to fund the goals and objectives that we've outlined in our improvement work, which I hope folks saw tonight. We don't just lean on the towns and say we need more, more, more. We look at how do we repurpose our dollars? How do we go after dollars outside of the district? And I think all of those things are really important to know because those are all of the factors that go into what Matt is going to walk us through next. Matt?
Sure. And I know that everyone is eagerly awaiting a few numbers to see on a chart. But before we get there, I do want to note, I feel like we maybe should have a drum roll when we do transition into the actual numbers. But I do want to be clear that there are some major factors to note. Most importantly, the initial cherry sheet numbers for FY22 came out today. So we were notified by DLS sometime between 2:30 and 3 p.m. that numbers came out, which meant that I jumped into the portal, started pulling some of the numbers and putting them back into the spreadsheets and essentially regenerating this presentation so that we can make sure that everything was as up to date as it could be. But that being said, there are still assumptions with respect to our revenues and with our expenses. So with that, we also want to point out this year, we are only receiving a minimal aid increase. So there's no big Student Opportunity Act bonus that we're getting. I believe we've discussed in the past how that act really focuses around really high concentrations of low-income students, and it will benefit the larger urban areas, but it will have a fairly minimal impact on us. One of those impacts will be, as you'll see, our charter reimbursement is lower. We are not getting back as much money as we used to for students that are attending charter schools. That's part of the new Student Opportunity Act. And another thing that's worth noting in these initial numbers are our transportation reimbursement is probably lower than we would have liked it to be. It's based off of the FY20 costs. And because we were able to, well, I shouldn't say because we were able to, because we weren't looking to, but because we didn't need to run as much transportation, then our costs were reduced, as will be our reimbursements. So I know that this is a little hard to view. I think Jason is going to try to pull up a PDF of it, though if you pull up the link, you should also be able to put it onto one of your screens and maybe magnify it as much as you would like.
The other thing is everybody should have a green bar at the top of their Zoom, and you have view options so you can view it at 100% original size, 150%. You can make it fit your screen without other folks having to do that. So,
Jane, can you see this okay? I just tried to pull up.
I can, yes.
Okay.
I can. It's terrific. And thank you, Jane, for that little tip. I am not an expert Zoom user, still making my way through it.
There we go.
But so the three big pieces. There are a lot of big pieces to our budget, but at the top, you'll see our expenses. Two big buckets that those numbers get given to us are our school choice sending tuition and our charter school sending tuition. So as you can see, over $1.2 million of our budget right off the bat is spent on those costs. The all other section where you see the 26.164, that's the budget that we put together for the district. It does include in-district and out-of-district transportation. It does include out-of-district costs, but those are the costs that the district has to assume from the general fund, our Fund 1 budget. To that all other number, I will say that since last night, when the school committee gave us some direction with respect to priorities and where we might be able to trim, those positions that I named earlier, we removed $165,000 just from those positions from that all other line. So what you can first note is the total percent increase to our budget over last year is a 3.44% increase. In order to get to a place where the costs to the town are reasonable, we are looking to, and again, I should preface all of this, we are still at a very preliminary stage. We share this information with all of these parties, with all of you here, so that we are 100% transparent from start to finish. And this is really, one of our starting points. It's not finalized. We'll continue to work on it, but we want to make sure that people are aware of what we're looking at. So we do plan on trying to use some additional circuit breaker funds this year. And the hope is that those will offset the costs of some of those additional special education needs that are really IEP driven or based upon individualized student needs. We have no choice but to fill a lot of those positions. So some of them we're going to try to backfill with the circuit breaker funding. We also, with respect to our return and recovery batch of positions, are hoping to apply that COVID-19 funding. We did just receive word that we should be getting approximately $550,000 in that COVID-19 funding. Our plan is to spread that over a 2-year course because we know that next year alone is not going to be enough to really bridge all of the gaps that the kids are coming in with. As we said, both social, emotional, and academic gaps. at least 2 years. We are hoping that there'll be more funding coming down the pipeline, but we certainly want to make sure that we're spreading those expenses over FY22 and FY23. And as you can see, we also have put in the use of E&D. I always, if I am going to apply E&D to anything, it will be towards costs that are not necessarily recurring costs. So in this case, what you will see is some of the math curriculum costs have been charged to E&D, and another piece of money that's been charged to E&D is that OPEB account. So we did specify $50,000 to make an initial investment in OPEB, and that we're saying will come from our E&D. Just today, as I mentioned, you can see some of the state revenues. I won't go through everything, but our Chapter 70, you can see it went from about 10,900,000 some odd thousand to slightly over 11 million. That's our minimal aid increase for our students. We did get a little bit more on regional transportation than I was even originally expecting, but it is still lower than what we would normally bring in. With that, circuit breaker, while it's listed at the 533,000, we don't know what our circuit breaker reimbursement is entirely until the claims are all finished. You can see on the side of the expenses and the revenues a little bit of a breakdown. I know that everyone on this meeting is aware, we have a couple of different factors that go into the assessments. We have the minimum local contribution. Those minimum local contributions were updated just this afternoon, so those are accurate as far as I know. You can note the MLC for Blackstone was increased this year, and that's according to the state. MLC for Millville was decreased slightly. Neither of the changes were tremendous, but they do represent significant changes to MLC. The exclusionary split is simply costs for transportation. We get that cost by taking all of the transportation costs for the district, removing the reimbursement that we'll be receiving from the state, and then splitting the remainder of those costs according to the proportion of students in the district. At the bottom of the page, you can see where I listed the percentages that we're basing these numbers on. For FY22, we'll be using 74.42% for Blackstone and 25.58% for Millville. The total breakdown of the assessments are to the right. That is a new capital assessment. So as of right now, as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, as to whenever I finished this sheet, these are the most up-to-date numbers. So the minimum local contributions are plugged in, exclusionary is plugged in, additional was calculated according to the expenses we are currently looking at. We're still working on things. And the capital expenses, you should expect those to be the final capital expenses for each of the towns. That brings the total assessments as listed on the right side. That leaves us at an increase of a percentage over our FY21 budget. For Blackstone, the assessment is a total 5.37% increase over FY21. For Millville, it's a total increase of 2.52% over the FY21 assessment. I know that the capital expenditures are really in a different bucket, so I did also remove them so that you can get a look at what happens if we take out the capital. That leaves Blackstone's capital expenses went up a little bit this year. That was mainly because there was a principal payment required on the JFK project. We just finished that boiler and windows and doors project. Now, even though we're rolling that financing into a larger package, there was a principal payment that was due this year. So you did see a slight increase in the capital for Blackstone, and Millville's capital assessment sees a slight decrease. So minus the capital, you're looking at a 5.25% increase for Blackstone and a 2.93% increase for Millville. Again, these are preliminary numbers. The revenues are still preliminary and could potentially change. Our expenses are still being reviewed, and we're combing through and seeing what changes we could potentially make as we move forward. Our next steps, we're going to keep watching the numbers.
Matt, before you get there,
Sure,
I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions
Absolutely.
or comments. I know when they're, kind of staring at the page, maybe they're writing notes, whatever, but see if
Absolutely, Jane. I apologize. I
Nope,
sometimes
that's okay.
get ahead of myself.
Is there anyone who wanted to comment, question, ponder?
Hi, this is Ken. I was just curious on the COVID-19 funding. You said you split it over 2 years. Is there any way that we could kind of do that in 1 year? Because obviously there'll probably be more funding if COVID still exists in the future.
There definitely are options where we could entertain using the funds differently. In conversations, Dr. DeFalco and I, we're not sure that there's going to be additional funding. So they did just recently make changes to the COVID funding that they've released. So there was the initial funding that they originally told us we had to have used by December 31st of 20. They now extended that out to into September of 22. And then the second round of funding, they've extended out to the September of 23.
Matt, can I speak to that a little bit? Is that
Sure,
okay?
certainly.
It's okay. I can't see anyone because I have my screen up. The first round of ESSER money that Matt's referring to, that was that 383 we used to pay for all of the COVID positions. I hate to use that term, but the extra positions we needed, partner teachers, the LPNs, the lead nurse, all the positions we needed to have the model that we have. And unfortunately, that money will be gone at the end of this year. And actually, we're very grateful to the towns that we're able to support in helping to pick up some of the additional costs of the tutors and the partner teachers. So that will be gone. This ESSER 2, as it's referred to from the Department of Education, the reason we spread it out over 2 years is because that's linked specifically to those intervention positions that we think are going to be 2-year positions. So we wanted to make sure that we had a fiscal safety net to keep the interventionists on for 2 years, because our sense was that was how long the kids were going to need them. If we put it all in one fiscal year, it takes that safety net away. And our big worry is what happens if we, come to the end of next year, which I think we're going to, and we realize we need to keep these people on for another year. The kids just aren't there yet. So that was just, Ken, if that answers your question, that was why we laid it out the way we did.
Yep, that makes sense.
So Jason, this is Mary. So these positions are tied to the CARES reimbursement. If that money goes away, that position goes away?
Those, the positions that were the interventionists, that last slide that I showed that had the two MAC interventionists for the elementary level. Do you remember that slide, Mary?
Yep.
Okay, so those positions are tied to this money, yes. And we did that on purpose, frankly. We shouldn't need all of those interventionists more than a couple of school years. We should be able to narrow those instructional and those learning gaps that the kids have developed as a result of this in the span of 2 academic years. So, sometimes when people get money, they, hire all these people and then the money goes away and they say, oh no, what are we going to do? And they try to put them in their budget. We're not doing that. We actually are connecting them to this grant intentionally, because the goal and the plan is to not need them beyond 2 academic years.
Well, that's good. I didn't want to be using one-time funds, and then then the budget goes up that amount later.
Absolutely. We totally agree with Mary. with
We
you.
agree with you 100%, Mary. And as I've mentioned in the E&D, no recurring fund, no recurring costs with it. Similarly, with these grants, we're really trying to target the use of those funds so that we're not just writing off some operating costs and recurring fees for the time being. We want to make sure that what we're putting in is sustainable.
Peter Caruso here. Could I ask three quick questions? One's a follow-on to what you're just talking about in terms of the ESSER funds. And you had that listed on an earlier slide, one of the early slides. You had 140 some grant ESSER. You had 383 coronavirus relief funds. And this 550 is the new round of ESSER. Is that correct?
Correct. So that the ESSER that's listed in the beginning was the summer startup money to try to get things going as we were entering into this fiscal year for COVID. That 300,000 that's listed in our, I call it the CVRF, that's the Coronavirus Relief Fund. That's the money that Jason is referencing. We're using to fund all of these additional positions that we have, the partner teachers, the additional custodial staff needed. And that money that will get used up through the course of this year. Originally, the government was thinking we would probably not need these positions through the entire year, which is why they set the grant originally to end on December 31st of 20. But we're going to need to keep them.
So that 550 was not on that slide. So that's new money and you're using that over 2 years, which I concur makes good sense. What's your E&D balance at this stage? You're using 123 there.
Yeah. So E&D is not certified yet. I've been going back and forth with the DOR over the last few days. We're in the final stretch, I believe. And I'm hoping to have the E&D number by the first or second week in February.
Okay, but but the 123 is working off of your anticipated E&D number, which you currently don't know.
I can confidently say that we would be able to draw that 123 out of E&D. But I can't say specifically what that number is at this point.
Okay, now here's the tough question. Can you just talk about the 50K on the OPEB amount? I mean, you got to start somewhere. I think that's great. That's obviously a small number against a large liability that you're sitting on. So just if you could talk about how you got to the number you got to and why you didn't try to go deeper on that.
Sure. Quite frankly, we were looking for a number that would be palatable to both removing it from our E&D and not impact the assessments directly to the towns. And as we continue these conversations, we certainly could entertain adding more money. Our thought was, at least to start, we would take anything that we put in from E&D, because these last couple of years have been such strenuous fiscal years. And we know that for our towns. And we're trying to work collaboratively, as everyone on this meeting knows. And we just couldn't see saying, well, we'd love to add $200,000 to the OPEB, and we're going to put that into the assessment, because that's all above the minimum local contribution, and that rolls into the additional costs. So our thinking was 50,000 was a good start for year one. We knew we have a lot of other things to be spending on with respect to this return and recovery. We're going to take that amount from E&D and see if it's palatable to the towns, and then maybe take some bigger steps as we continue on.
So if I could just follow on, personally, I'd like to see you find a way to find that in your budget somehow. But that being said, I applaud you for the effort you've done on this. Based on your 11 slides that you went through, I thought we'd be in a much worse position than we're looking at right here. And I understand this is preliminary. So I just, well done on that. Also, very well done. I know you've worked hard, you and the leadership, Jason and crowd, to make sure you were doing as much in-person live learning as you could. And the statistic you referenced very early on supports that. And, you know, that's awesome. You're a model for other school districts, I would say, in that regard.
Thank you for that, Peter. That means a lot for people to acknowledge that. It has been a lot of work, but we're doing it for our kids, and that's the most important thing.
Peter, if I could too, just quickly, you mentioned that summer grant of 140,000, just so folks know where that went. That's actually what it costs in PPE, cleaning the HVAC, having the electrician work on all the air handlers to swap out filters, open up the filters. We had to purchase HEPA filters, air purifiers. We know more about that stuff than I can tell you I've ever cared to know. But that money went towards those items because if we didn't do that, we couldn't open. So just if you're wondering, where was that 140,000? That's where it went. The 384 went to all of the extra positions that I mentioned so that we could open and maintain the model for this year. And the 550 that Matt mentioned will go to the interventionists over the 2-year span. So I just want to make sure that we keep restating that so everybody has a really good sense of where that money has been and will be spent.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Joe Gatchell here. Before I start, I just want to say, I have 3 kids in the district, and I think this last year and a half has gone far superior to any other one I know from any other town. So my comments and questions are strictly from a financial standpoint, not anything else. Looking over the numbers here, last year we had an increase of 1.8%. This year it's 3.4%. Comparing us to other regional districts I could find, I compared us to Minden, Upton, and Wachusett. And based on and I know this data is a little old, the most recent report cards with full data were 2018. We had on average 13 students per educational staff. Minden had 14, Wachusett had 16. They're scoring double digits higher than us percentage-wise, proficient and advanced on MCAS. And we're spending more money per student than Wachusett by over $2,000 a student.
I think that's
in the middle of a pandemic. How do I, as a member of the finance committee, go back to people of Blackstone and say, hey, this is why you should spend this much more money this year? Where are we making gains?
That is a fabulous question. I can
Joe,
definitely.
can I just jump in, please?
Yeah.
Jason.
Go ahead, Matt.
I just have to jump in because I can say right from the start, my 3 children go to the Wachusett Regional District. And they just returned to school for their hybrid model for the first time last Tuesday.
Oh, I know. I work with a lot of people in your district.
And my high school student, who is a sophomore, her hybrid model entails going in for 2 days a week for 3.5 hours a day. I'm sickened by what my district, I say that genuinely, I'm sickened by what my district has been doing with the students. And again, when we are presenting this budget for FY22, it is relatively conservative when you're considering all of the things that we're trying to make sure that we're doing with respect to that return and recovery and remediating the gaps in learning. That the districts that I'm looking at, they're not doing that.
I strictly from the pandemic standpoint, I agree with you. I work with people in the Wachusett area, everywhere. We're doing, the best out of any district I know. My question is financially, why are we spending more per student but scoring so much lower? And where's the return on the investment? Where can I sell to my town? This is worth the money.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite questions. And Matt, thanks for answering that from the perspective of a parent, in kind of having.
That's been eating me up. I admit that to everyone.
I actually agree with you on that standpoint.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that. So a couple things. If you remember back to the district improvement strategy, we talked a lot about and have been working very hard on what we call the what, and the how. So the what is the curriculum and the how is the instructional model. The past 2 years, we have put, and I can only speak to that because I haven't been here obviously prior, but we have put a significant amount of time, effort, and energy into fixing our curriculum and developing what we call an instructional framework that is anchored in an instructional focus area in each school, 2 to 3 best practices in each school that everybody agrees to using, data cycles, or we're monitoring student work, and we're monitoring student outcomes through that work and then adjusting our practice. We just put our instructional coaches in place. This is the 2nd year that they've been in place. Through our curriculum work, we're in year 1 of a brand new English language arts core program. We haven't had before, frankly, in quite some time. At the pre-K all the way through grade 12 level, we've put in place a new science program all the way through the school system. This year, we are studying mathematics and looking at our math resources to make sure we have the right materials in the hands in front of students. What kicked this work off was an audit. We had written a grant to the Department of Education for $50,000, and we were awarded that. And we actually had Johns Hopkins Education Department fly up to BMR. I don't know if folks remember this, but they spent a significant amount of time in our school district. They studied the written, taught, and learned curriculum. And what they found was no surprise, which was teachers at that time, so this was 3 years ago, were essentially creating their own materials. It looked different from classroom to classroom. They were teaching different standards. They were working on different projects, studying different texts. It was a little bit of kind of a wild, wild west, so to speak. And what we have done is essentially standardize the instructional materials, resources, programs, and now we're working on standardizing the instruction. So if you're noticing that we seem to be behind academically than other places, those are some of the reasons that I would put forward as why we're doing the work we're doing. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we didn't talk about tonight, because frankly, the data is a year old at this point, through a different approach at the high school in terms of actual individual case management, our high school graduation rate went from 88% to 96% in 1 year. Our dropout rate went from 2.9% to 0.5 in 1 year. So I say those things to you only to state that we are absolutely moving in the right direction. And I have said very clearly to the school committee since they hired me, I'll need the resources, but hold me accountable. Because we've got to make sure that we're spending every dollar the right way to get the outcomes we need for kids. One of the real crappy things about the pandemic from this perspective, we don't have any data to show for last year. Had this not happened, we would actually have a whole slide on growth over the past 3 years. But unfortunately, we don't have that. And we won't. And this year, frankly, we won't have it either. This year, the MCAS assessment is going to look super different. So we're trying to use the internal data that we have to show that. So I hope that answers your question.
And I want to address one of the statements that was made, because the cost in Mendon Upton, which I don't think is a accurate comparison, but their total expenditure per pupil is $16,343, and Blackstone Millville's $14,000. So they're actually $2,000 per student above what our expenditure is.
Right, and that's the same data I found. We fell right in the middle between Mendon and Wachusett, but grade-wise, they are leaps and bounds ahead of us. And I thank you, Dr. DeFalco. I think that really answered the question. That gives me something, if people ask, to answer it, because I do think, like I said, that was strictly a numbers question. I applaud everything you guys have been doing. I have seen, with a middle schooler and an elementary schooler, I have seen the significant change over the last 2 years in what's going on in the school. So I thank you guys for that. And I just want to make sure that, with the extra money, we're continuing to move in the right direction.
And that makes a ton of sense. And Joe, thank you for the positive feedback. From a numbers perspective also, it's interesting that you say we fall right between the Mendon Upton and the Wachusett. And I can speak for Wachusett, having served on the school committee I served on the school committee for 3 years. When you look at the finances from a numbers perspective, Wachusett is a significantly larger district, which cuts the overhead cost across the number of pupils. So when you're looking at smaller districts as well, especially regional districts, we still have to have all of these same positions, all of these same functions. You know, we've mentioned on a number of occasions, our central office staff is 3 of us. But again, the sheer number of students we have in the Wachusett district definitely offsets a lot of the expenses so that they can get more of that per pupil dollar right back into the instructional materials and into the instructional staff and the places where it's needed.
I just have one follow-up question on that. Is there, the most recent data I could find was 2018. Is there any, do you guys know, how have we trended on MCAS and other standardized SAT scores since over the last 2 years?
Yeah, so our growth, our student growth, or SGP, it's fallen within the moderate range, which obviously 50 is average, right? So we've been a couple of points above 50 in some grades or a couple of points below 50 in other grades. So we always look at the growth as one measurement, but we do look very heavily at the proficiency or the meeting or exceeding expectations. And in some places, we've seen a very large uptick, particularly in science, when we've been able to bring forward some new science units and materials to our classrooms. So we've seen an uptick there. One of the things that was just really hard for us to swallow last year, when the results came out, obviously not the spring, but the spring before, our high school was at the, so they changed the measure. So it's just kind of funky to explain, but if you remember, the high school used to take what they called the legacy MCAS, and then they shifted it to the new MCAS 2.0 last year. Well, when they did that, they changed the cut scores in terms of what is meeting or exceeding expectations, what used to be the old proficient in advance. We had 99% of our kids, the year they changed the exam and the cut scores, and I know the school committee remembers this, we had 99% of our students that were either advanced or proficient, 99%. We had 3 children that were needs improvement. They changed the cut scores to meeting or exceeding expectations, and they recalibrated the assessment for the new MCAS 2.0, and we went to 58%. So it was a killer for us because they moved the goalposts, which is okay, by the way. Like, we're fine with that. But it's a really tough pill to swallow when you looked at the preliminary results and we had huge growth. And then, to find out the cut scores were changed because of the new MCAS 2.0, and that ended up dropping our levels. So it's a really interesting question because they have changed the assessment in the past couple of years, but it's the right question to ask. And those are the conversations we should keep having, frankly, because all of this work is going to support that. One other just data point I want to mention, just back to that question about those 3 particular school districts. And this isn't an excuse, it's just fact. So I just want to share that. Our high needs population, if you remember, that's low income and or ELL and or special ed, is just under 40%. We're like 38 point something percent. Mendon Upton's 26 and Wachusett Regional is 27. So it's not an excuse, it's just a fact. So the way that we approach our work needs to be different because the students that are in that high needs population have different barriers in front of them that impact their learning. So I just want to make sure that, that we understand that while that is not an excuse, it is just in fact what we have to prepare our systems and structures for.
No, I appreciate it. And I am a huge advocate of, the best thing a town has to offer is their school system. So as long as there's an answer, I appreciate it.
These are awesome questions.
Yeah, they really are.
Yep. Anyone else? All right, next steps, Matt.
All right, let me get to that. Sorry, Matt.
Well, I was just thinking, you can now rest assured with respect to next steps, I'll never be applying to Wachusett. So for our next steps, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be updating the state revenue numbers as we're receiving them. We just got them today. We can anticipate that this was the governor's numbers. We'll have House, we'll have a joint committee, and every time the numbers change, we'll update them and see how that impacts our overall picture. We plan on meeting with the members of the town finance committees, boards of selectmen, and town admin to give them updates on where we are with respect to the adjustments that we're making. And again, I'm anticipating that within the next couple of weeks, we may get some more information on insurance. We are hopefully going to get some more information on E&D. And those are things that will help guide those conversations with all of the members at the table. We're going to keep revising this budget until we're ready to submit it. Hopefully, maybe we'll be done before March 10th, but we'll be working right up to that window. And then on the 11th, we will have our public hearing and the school committee adoption.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other comments? Okay. Jason, were you going to talk about the capital, or was Matt?
Yeah, no, Matt was going to give a quick overview. We've already mentioned OPEB. So Matt, do you want to talk briefly about the capital project, the capital study?
Sure. So the capital study was just recently completed. We did have DRA, Drummy Roseanne Anderson present at one of our school committee meetings. They've put together a very thorough analysis of each of our buildings. The things that they identified were lifespan, potential upcoming issues with our mechanical systems, our electrical systems. They monitored all of the exterior and interior facilities, looking for compromises to the structures in the buildings, looking for compliance issues with respect to ADA. They also were looking at just the general lifespan of these buildings and our properties. And they really put together a comprehensive package of what things should be addressed in what they didn't prioritize things, but they basically said, these are things that we would recommend addressing within the next 2 years. These are things that we would recommend addressing within 5, within 10, and maybe out to 20, 30 years. So the end product that we have, which is also very easy to manipulate because I have the information in spreadsheets that they've given me in an electronic format. That information will be the next step for moving forward with a capital planning subcommittee and identifying what our longer term plans will be so that we can present that information to the towns and really prepare in advance what it is that we'll be looking to do, and also to get feedback on what the priorities are from both towns. Not sure how in-depth.
Well, Matt, I have one question about the subcommittee. Will it strictly be school committee, or will you be involving members from Blackstone and Millville like you did for the RAC, maybe a selectman and a FinCom person?
I believe, I don't want to speak for the committee, but I would imagine that there will be community members as well. So that could be boards of selectmen, town administrators, and the meetings again will be, open so that we can certainly hear everyone's take on things. And I can't, again, Mary, thank you enough for your participation in the beginnings of the process to identify a really reliable and good source to do this work. They did a terrific job. And another thing that I really appreciated about the work that they did another piece of it was their space analysis, and they analyzed what parts of our buildings are being used to capacity, what are under capacity, and what things, which you may even be surprised, we have things that are over capacity. They just don't really fit their use. And our next steps, in addition to just, getting things fixed, are hopefully coming up with a master plan for the district so that we could submit to MSBA and say, here's what our master plan for the district is going to look like over the next 20 years. And here's where MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, I'm sorry, sometimes I use acronyms people may not know. So we appeal to them, and then we can get additional funding and support to take on some of these larger endeavors. And not to scare anyone right off the bat, but it was clear through the report and even the initial discussion of it, our high school is something that we're going to have to look at, whether we decide to fix it or move in the direction of a middle high school at the site of the Hartnett and then turn that someplace else. But again, those are things that we will discuss at the subcommittee level when we can really dig into that report.
Right. And Matt, before we scare anybody off, the MSBA requires you to look at 3 options.
Yeah.
Just so the residents know that. We're not just going to say building a new school. They have to look at
Correct.
add renovation, build in place. There's multiple options you have to weigh. And DRA is an excellent firm. I'm glad that they worked out for you. And I would be willing to be part of that committee if you needed it, based on my years of experience. I will not work in my own town, but I will volunteer.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, and Mary, we definitely understand that. And Matt was just sharing any kind of an overview of what.
Right.
We're not anywhere near that level of, yeah.
Well, I will add to that I don't know if it was Avon or Air. They were losing so many students to school choice. The town administrator did the math. And when they built a new school, it cost them less because the kids stayed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I think we have done our agenda items. Did anybody have anything they thought we were going to address or hoped we were going to address, or anything else for the good of the order, as they say? Nothing? Okay. Well, I thank you all very much. I think this was one of the bigger, and I just lost my feed, so hopefully you can hear me. One of the bigger groups that we've had, and I really appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedules to meet with us. And certainly, if you have additional questions as you're going through the material, I know Matt put the PowerPoint PDF into the chat, so you can make a copy of it for yourself. But if there's anything else you need, certainly reach out to Jason, Matt, or anyone on the school committee. We're happy to have lots more discussions. And we will have many more discussions as we move forward. So thank you all very much. And if there's nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Close all the committees.
I'm going to go motion by Tara, second by Tammy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And Jesse, thank you very much once again for making this all work for us.
Thank you.